Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. In this video, I'm going to continue a discussion on genealogy. So this is genealogy part 2. Now, in doing genealogy, your focus is generally building a family tree. This is how you organize structurally the genealogical research. Um, Basically, the family tree includes the names of all people who are related to each other that you discover through your genealogical research. Um, there's two types of family trees you can make. There's the online family tree that you can build on genealogical websites like Ancestry.com. And then there's the manual type of family tree, a paper family tree. Uh, this An old version of this would be a family tree that appears in a family Bible, for instance, in the front or the back of a family Bible, an actual tree with divisions on it and the names of people, their birth dates and the dates of their deaths. So there's really two ways to do this. The online version is much better. It goes up into the cloud and it's always there, and other people can access it from any place on the planet. And you can add to it, and you don't have to make corrections. You just do it electronically, and you can attach electronic files and sources and photographs, and put in any information you want about a particular individual, and it won't get cluttered in the tree itself. So the online version of the family tree is by far much, much better than the manual version. However, the manual version has the benefit of uh, you don't have to pay an online service to build it. You can do it yourself. You just need paper. Um, you can take it with you, and you'll know you have it, because you never know what's going to happen to the cloud, or whether your family tree that you work so hard on online will always be there. You don't know that. Plus, you have to pay people like Ancestry a yearly fee, for instance, to add to that family tree. So there's a cost associated with it. So there are some reasons to do a manual family tree. Um, there are really these two different types. Now, what's a family tree? Well, a family tree is a branching of different families and the names and dates of their births and deaths and marriages. And it has a structure like a tree. It's got branches, and the branches have branches, and that's where you put the names of different people. So an online family tree might look something like this. So we'll start with you, and then it'll branch off to your father and your mother, and then there might be further branches. Here you have your paternal grandfather and grandmother, and your maternal grandmother and your grandfather, and this structure can continue as far as you want it to go. So this is what the online family tree looks like, and there will be names associated with each of these lines. And it just goes back. You can put names on each of these lines, and you can click on each particular individual and just look at their portion of the tree. And so that's how you move through it, this electronic online family tree. So you usually have the name and then the surname of the person. So if it's a paternal father, it's going to have the same surname as you. If it's your maternal mother, it's going to have a maiden name, and then it just keeps going further. So your surname ends up being on your paternal side, and it's just the males. So your name just goes back in time, but for each generation, you get a whole host of other names uh, on your family tree. So your particular last name, the further back you go, you get greatly outnumbered by other surnames. So this is how Ancestry does it, and it's all electronic, and you can click on any one name and see their particular tree and move back into their tree, and you can click on the name of anybody in that tree and look at their tree. So it's a very nice organized fashion, and you can get a broader picture of the entire tree as well online. So that's the online tree. You can also do it manually as well. A manual family tree can resemble what I just showed you. In a family Bible, you might see something, a format like that. But because you want to put in more information about people than just their date of birth and date of death, essentially, there's a better way to organize it if you're going to do it manually. So the way I would do it if I was going to do it manually is I would divide each last name into houses. And I would also then have a family tree associated with each particular house. And then I would have an identifying number for each particular individual, which references a page or another document with that individual number, which has that person's information on it. So, for instance, let's just say you're going to have a family tree for each house, such as the house with your last name on it. So you would have a separate family tree entitled House of whatever your surname is. And then what you would do is you'd build a family tree, and you start off with the oldest members of it. Uh, like this. So the oldest member, the oldest male with that same last name, you would list at the top. And then in brackets, you would put the name of their spouse. And then you would give them a number. And the number would refer to a page of an ongoing list of individuals that you're keeping track of. And on that particular page, you would have that individual. It would be dedicated to that individual and their identifying information or their significant information from their lives. So then you would go down from here. And let's say this couple had 3 children. So you put the first child and then who they married, and you'd have this reference number to a particular page. Um, you can even put a note in here if you want, giving the years of their birth and date, their birth and death. You do something like that. If the person if the person isn't married, you leave it blank. Uh, if they're a woman and they they change the surname, you can put the name of the spouse, um, the page number, and you can build this sort of house tree for each surname, and then you can continue, you keep going. This couple has 2 kids. He didn't have any kids. They have 3 kids, and you can put the same information down there and there, and you could build a house tree like that. So each page would have a house tree on it and these reference numbers. And then in a bigger book with pages numbered with these reference numbers, you put the information about this particular person. And for each of these surnames, you have a different page with a different house and a different house tree. So you can keep track of all the different houses, of all the different surnames that appear in your family tree, as well as the individuals and their identifying and important information. So if you do it manually, you end up with either a real big book full of pages, or you end up with a lot of pieces of paper, essentially. But it's a way of organizing it. And you really need to organize your genealogical research. You need to organize it in some fashion so that you can get to it quickly and answer questions about your family quickly, so you have a quick reference in order to find that. You don't want a giant stack of documents that's not organized and you have no real way of getting to something quickly. Um, that's not going to be helpful to you or to anybody else who has questions about your family that you wanted to answer. So you might have another piece of paper with a reference number for a particular individual. You might have the identifying number down here. It might be the page number. And then this document can list all sorts of information about that particular person in categories that you can just fill in the blanks. like name, information regarding birth, marriage, death, dates, places, times, locations, military services, interesting facts about the person. Literally, you can put in any category you want. So you make this sort of blank form and you fill in the names and the information for each person who's in your family tree. And you can update this periodically, either by hand markings in pen or pencil to change things, or you could create new ones of these documents with corrected information in it. You could save these documents on your computer or on a file, but you could also print them out and have it in an actual book. Well, so you know how you're going to organize your family tree and how you're going to store it, whether online or on paper or even on both, if you want to do it that way. So, how do you find the genealogical information? How do you find out about people? How do you find out who is related to you? Well, obviously, the first thing you do is you go to your family sources, living people who can give you information about other people in your family. And you interview people and you ask people the names and last names and spellings and dates of birth and locations of birth and dates of death and location of death and marriages and who they married and the names of their kids, and get the same information, same sort of factual and date information for their children or their grandparents or anybody, any other relative that they know about. So that's your best source because you're dealing with somebody who actually knows the answer. Now, as some people get older, they become much less reliable in terms of the answers to those questions. So you're probably going to get more reliable information from younger people than from older people. And some people, they don't know, and you'd be surprised that they don't know the answers to some of these questions. For whatever reason, they didn't ask. And some people just aren't good with names and dates and spellings, and they're just not going to have very reliable information. But that's the first place you go because that's your most reliable source of accurate information. Plus, facts about someone's history are only going to be found from living people because 99% of people don't have their histories published in books or written down anywhere really. So you're only going to get that information from people who know about it or from the person themselves. So, all right, well, you've exhausted living people to get this information from. So, what's the next best source? And that would be the online genealogical sources. For example, Ancestry.com has got an unbelievable number of genealogical resources that you can search in order to get information about people. And uh, the number of sources are immense, and they differ. But there's some sources that in general are extremely useful and really form the backbone of genealogical resource or research. So what are those sources? Well, census data is probably the top source of genealogical information. Different countries have different census. Censuses are taken seriously, and the information is generally reliable. And it also usually covers a very large number of people. So census data is great. Plus, censuses are often repeated after a certain number of years. For example, every 10 years. So you can track people and you can track the growth of their family and add new names and see connections that you might not otherwise know about because maybe somebody's relative is living with them in any particular year in which a census was taken and you didn't know about that relative. And you'll pick that up from the census data. Other genealogical records that you can get online are church records. Church records are extremely valuable. Uh, Church records involve baptisms, marriages, deaths, and it usually gives the names of significant people involved in those things, like the person who was born or baptized, their parents, their sponsors, the people who are married. Often it'll give the maiden names of the women who were married. Maiden names can be extremely difficult to obtain because women in some countries just simply use the husband's last name. And so you may not know who their family is because they didn't use their maiden name. And finding their maiden name can really help you a lot in building your family tree to find out about another branch of the family you didn't know about because you didn't know this person's maiden name. Maiden names appear infrequently, but you might find them on marriage records, and yet you might also find them on death certificates. Oftentimes, the maiden name of the mother is used of the person who died, but it's rare, and but it can be found, and it can be really critical to building up your family tree. There's also civil records of births, marriages, and deaths. So not only is the church keeping track of these things, the civil authorities do as well. And so you have a double layer covering the same topics, church and state. When you get and the state records can be usually more accurate than the church records. Some because the church records are often handwritten, and the state records are. It depends, but they're usually clearer. Uh, and when you get into really old church records, they may be written in Latin, and you have to be able to translate the Latin into English to find out what the name of this person actually is. But you can do that actually. Google, you just go on Google and look for a translation from Latin to English, and you type in the Latin, and it'll give you the English. So, online, you can solve these problems today, even translating Latin into English. Online, you also find genealogical histories. There were genealogists whose source of income was to publish books and lists of genealogies of various families, usually living in some sort of geographical area. And they did their job professionally, so you can generally rely on what they had to say. And you can find those sources online too. Other sources would be like maybe newspaper articles. Newspapers usually have obituaries in them. And you can find the obituary of somebody and it'll give you more information about that person. Some obituaries can be just a single line saying this person died. Um, and then they can get more complicated from that. They can give you the date of death. They can give you family member names. Some obituaries can tell you the person's whole life story. So it's hit and miss, but newspapers can be very valuable in genealogical research. Another immensely valuable thing is somebody else's family tree. And that's why an online genealogical source can be extremely valuable, because a source like Ancestry.com will give you access to the family trees of other members. So somebody else probably has the person you're looking for on their family tree already. So if you can look at that person's family tree, you can cheat and get all the information that they've discovered and put it on your family tree. Just swap it right over with a couple of presses of a button. You can copy it and paste it right onto your tree. They did all the work, but you got the results. That can be very, very valuable. Ancestry allows you to do DNA tests, and you can search for the surnames of people who have matched your DNA. You can search their family trees for particular surnames, and you can come up with their family trees and those people with those surnames, and you might be able to find out more about your particular family because you know genetically you're linked to this other member. And if you see that your surname appear in their tree, there's a pretty strong presumption that you're related to whoever that person is that appears on their tree. um, so there's all these databases and collections of records online. And you search with them using search boxes. And the search boxes ask general questions like last names, first names, uh, years of birth, locations of birth, uh, years and dates and locations of marriages and deaths and other events in their lives, and the names of their spouses and children and parents. And you can use these different um, fields in these search boxes to refine your search and look through a vast collection of names and come up with the most probable matches. And they may give you a list of 100 results. But the first few matches are probably your best choices. So through these sort of searches online, through these online collections, you can get very good at finding relatives. However, it's a bit tricky because of lots of reasons. The records aren't going to be exact. They're not going to be exactly what you think they ought to say. That doesn't mean the person you're looking for isn't in the collection. It's just that you gotta be aware that there's going to be deviations in all sorts of things, like spellings of names, dates, locations. There can be deviation in practically any field of information you're searching, and yet this is still the right person. So you've got to become sort of an expert in realizing when you've located the right person and when you haven't located the right person. Just somebody who looks similar to the person that you're looking for but isn't. You can search for ranges. Um, like for instance, Ancestry in their search boxes, you can search for the exact spelling that you've put down, or you can ask for similar sounding names, similar spelled names. Um, that's very valuable because you'd be surprised at how many times people's names are misspelled. That's because records are taken and the people who are writing down the names are the ones who are doing the spelling. So oftentimes they're getting the name from a third party or not from the horse's mouth, and then they're interpreting how that should be spelled. So the misspellings are rampant among collections of data and census data. So it happens all the time. It's not a surprise, and it's expected, and you should expect that names will be misspelled constantly. Dates end up being wrong a lot. Doesn't mean you don't have the right person. It just means for whatever reason, the person who gave the information got it wrong, or the person who wrote it down got it wrong. Happens all the time. Now, I'll give you some warnings when you're doing these searches. When you're looking in somebody else's family tree, you got to understand that a lot of people aren't very careful when they put their family tree together, and they make mistakes, and they think they're related to somebody when they're really not. And just don't make the assumption that somebody else's family tree is 100% accurate. I'd be surprised if it was. So you have to double check the person's family tree. It can be a useful clue, but you want to check their sources. Hopefully, they've cited sources that you can check to see where they got these names. But you got to double check their work and make sure it's correct. Because if you put the wrong name in your tree, not only do you have the wrong name and the wrong branch, but you've cut yourself off from finding the truth, the true name, and the true branch that should be on your tree. So you got to be very careful in simply copying somebody else's tree, because 9 times out of 10, there's a mistake there somewhere. They were sloppy, and you gotta check their sources. You gotta double check their homework and make sure they got it right. Um, Ancestry is great because it allows you to insert sources in your family tree, like whether they're references to particular census data or other documents, certificates, whatever. You could bring it up and actually look on the particular page where this person appears in order to see whether the information is correct or not. That's very important and very helpful. Ancestry also has this function where they give you hints. What they'll do is for any given person, they'll give you a bunch of hints. And you can look at each hint, and the hint is really a record of some sort. And you can decide for yourself whether this is your ancestor or the person you're interested in or not. And if it is, you can check, yes, this is this person, and Ancestry will put it in as a source under that person's name. Or you can check off, no, this isn't the person, and Ancestry will hide it. Or you put maybe, and they'll just leave it till later. You can look at it again. Um, that's very helpful. You can get a lot of information very quickly without having to have to do a lot of the legwork of searching through the collections yourself, just by looking at the Ancestry hints. But be aware that not all hints are actually the person that you're looking for. Lots of times the hints are somebody else. It's somebody else. This document's interesting. It could be this person, but it turns out it's not the person you're interested in. So even the hints can be mistaken. So just don't assume that the hints are absolutely correct and that this is in fact your family. A lot of people who build these family trees make the mistake of just assuming all the hints are their family, and they accept them all, and then they assume it's their family and it becomes part of their tree, and it's not them at all. Uh, and they thought the computer would do the entire job for them, and it won't. You have to do it yourself too. You have to analyze the data and look for indicia of reliability that this is in fact your family member or the person you're interested in. A really important fact to remember in genealogy is there are a lot of people who have the same name as you or the person you're interested in finding. And there are doppelgangers all over the place. And they're not related to you, but they got the same name, they got the same dates, they may even have the names of the same children. And you'd be surprised. Um, and they're not related to you, and they're not the person you're looking for, and you'll find them all over the place wherever you look. There's always doppelgangers, people who you think are the right person but they're not. It's a parallel person living a parallel life who is not related to you at all. So a lot of genealogy involves eliminating doppelgangers, getting rid of these extra people who aren't related to you but who look like they might be. And the doppelgangers usually outnumber the actual person that you're interested in finding. So you got to get really good at um, distinguishing between the real person and the doppelganger in order to eliminate the doppelganger and keep the person that you're interested in, or at least understand that, you know, these online databases are basically only as good as the records they contain. And the records, even if they're vast, are still limited. And there's always a good chance that a record simply doesn't exist for the person you're interested in. So when you're doing these online searches, you're really looking at the people for whom records exist. It may be that the person that you're looking for, there is no record of this person, and that happens all the time. And you have to um, figure out whether that might be the case with your particular person. It's simply there is no record, and that's the way it goes. Um, don't make the assumption that there is a record for every person you're interested in finding. There may not be. And especially the further back in time you go, the availability of records goes down uh, drastically. Also, depending on what country you're talking about. So be aware of that. So what you got to do is, of the records that are available, you got to figure out whether this is the person that you're interested in. And for that, you need indicia of reliability. What this means is the more things that you can match with this particular person in this particular record, the more likely it is that this is the person that you're talking about. This is the person that you want to find and put on your trade. If all you have is the name, and you have a record with a name that matches that person, that's one level of indicia of reliability, but it's not the best level at all because there's lots of people who have the same name. So just because it's the same name doesn't mean it's the same person. So the more pieces of identifying information that you can match with this particular record with the person that you want to find, the more likely it is that this person is the person you're looking for. So the more information you can match, the greater your confidence is that this person is the one you want. And the genealogical skill is really all about rigor. That's what separates a good genealogist from a poor genealogist. It's the attention to detail and the rigor in which they look for matches between the information that they have and the information of the target that they want to find. And the more there's a match, the more rigor there is, the greater the likelihood that this is, in fact, the person that they're looking for. So um, you have to be rigorous in your research. You can't simply just assume that whatever record you found is the person you're looking for. You have to look for clues that prove that this is the person. You don't want the wrong person in your tree. So the more information you can match, the greater the likelihood this is the person you're looking for. So, indicia of reliability includes the exact spelling of the names. Uh, that's one factor. Does that match? Now, names don't necessarily have to be spelled exactly the same. And that's part of the challenge. There's definitely variation in spelling from year to year, um, from century to century. The sloppiness of whoever wrote down the record could change the spelling. Doesn't mean it's not the person you're looking for. It's just spelled differently. But an exact match in terms of spelling is a strong indicia of this being the same person. Other indicia would be matching the dates exactly in terms of year. Is it the same year? Is it the same month? That would be even better. Is it the same day of the same month of the same year? Well, that's the best you can hope for. That's a strong indicator that you're dealing with the same person. Bet you have a match there. But even in terms of dates, you got to be careful because people vary in dates. You'd be surprised. Like if you look at census data, you'd be surprised that you could know you're dealing with the same person every 10 years. You could know for a fact this is the same person. And you'd be surprised that the census takers put down different dates for the person's uh, age or date of birth or month of birth, or especially with women, oftentimes their age will be younger than their age as it appears on the census will be younger than they really are because they're hiding their age. I've seen this all the time. Doesn't mean it's not the same person. So there's a little bit of fluidity that goes involved in matching up exact dates when it comes to especially census data from decade to decade, because you should expect some variation. There will be. Doesn't mean it's not the same person. Um, and there can be gross misspellings of a person's name, first name and last name, on census data every 10 years. You'd be surprised at how census takers can butcher people's names. Doesn't mean it's not the same person. It's just poor recording by whoever took the census data or whoever gave the information to the census data taker. Now, another indicia of reliability is the document itself. Is this a highly reliable document? For instance, a photograph of a tombstone, a headstone, a grave marker, or even if you visit a cemetery itself and you look at the grave marker, chances are the information on a grave marker is going to be accurate. People make sure that whatever gets on their gravestone, tombstone, or grave marker is exactly correct, because this is them. They're at the location of their body for forever, basically. So they make sure it's correct. So a tombstone information is usually extremely reliable. Um, Official certificates, like birth certificates, are usually very reliable. Uh, Oftentimes, because look who's given the information about the birth. It's the parents, and the parents are young, so chances are they know the information. Death certificates a little less so, because the party who knows the information, they're dead, so they're not the one giving the information. It's somebody who knows them, and that person may not know all the facts or the exact dates, but they're going to give the information regardless because they have to fill out the form. So it may be a little bit less exact. Newspaper articles are great. Newspapers generally try to present the facts properly. It, that's just the editorial policies of the newspaper in general. And they don't like getting sued for libel. So they generally try to make sure their facts are correct. So if you find it in a newspaper, there's a good chance it's correct. And there's usually obituaries on everybody. So you can search through old newspapers online and discover somebody's obituary, and you can get all sorts of information from obituaries. It can be as simple as the fact that so and so died on a particular day. You can include family members, spouses, locations of burial, where they were buried, what cemetery, um, or it could be a full history of the person and their biography, essentially. Depends. Um, Cemeteries are great places to find information. You can go find an obituary, find out where the person was buried, or you can find their death certificate. That'll also tell you what cemetery they were buried in. And then you can go to the cemetery and ask the cemetery keeper uh, for the lot location or the plot location of where this person was buried. And they also keep books, and they know who's buried there, and they have dates of death and how old the person was and who they were buried with. And you might be able to find their tombstone there, which will give you more information about that person. But there's a good chance the information is in the books that the cemetery keeper has, and he can give you the information. And oftentimes in these plots, there's more than one person buried. There might be three people on top of each other. And from that association, who's buried with who, you can uh, perceive family relationships, because chances are, if you're buried with somebody, that's a family member. They may have a completely different last name that you never heard of, but it's a good chance that's a family member. So you may have learned about a new branch of your family just from looking at the cemetery records. Oftentimes, you can only get these cemetery records, though, by visiting the actual cemetery and asking the cemetery keeper to give you that information from their books. Church records can be great, absolutely great if you can get a hold of them. Uh, but church records often are handwritten, and they can be indecipherable or very, very difficult to figure out the spelling of a particular person's name. Especially the older these records get, they can be very blurry, very light, with not a lot of contrast, very, very illegible, difficult to read. And they are what they are. So when you get these sorts of records online, often there'll be a transcription of the record. Somebody will have read it, transcribed it, and then created a database of those transcriptions where you can find a transcription of the record. But oftentimes these transcriptions are incorrect, because the person who's doing the transcribing has just as difficult a time reading it as you would have. So oftentimes it's completely wrong. The spelling is wrong. Maybe even the whole name is wrong. So whenever you're dealing with those sorts of records, and you be careful of relying just on a transcription, try to see the original document and read it for yourself. Oftentimes you'll find that there was a mistake in transcription, and oftentimes it's a vital mistake, a very important mistake. They could get first names completely wrong, and the spellings of names completely wrong. And so check the original document. Whenever you have access to the original, look at the original yourself. Don't rely just on the transcription. If all you have is a transcription, well, then that's all you have. You have to go with that. But always look at the original document. Another a temptation that amateur genealogists have is to simply jump to conclusions that so and so is related to them without using rigor. So avoid that. If there's a glaring error, don't ignore it. If you have um, an expectation that so and so person would have this particular last name, and you look at a death certificate and you look at the name of the mother and her maiden name, and it doesn't match your expectation, don't overlook glaring errors like that. Uh, that means that this is not the person you're talking about or you're looking for. So when the name is completely different, it's not the same person. Because what are the odds that the person who was filling out this death certificate, for instance, got that name wrong? They should know what the name is. They knew the person who died. So chances are they didn't get that name wrong. So when you see a glaring error like that, just accept the fact that this is not the person you were looking for. Don't assume that there was some sort of mysterious name change for some mysterious reason, and come up with some story why that occurred. No, that's usually not the case. It's just telling you this is not the person you're looking for. The person you're looking for may not have a record, and that happens a lot. So, in being rigorous, you want to look for matches. So you look for matches. Do they have the same kids? The same kids with the same names? Are the ages of those kids roughly the same? The closer the ages are, the more likely it is you have a match. The more kids that you can connect or match, the more likely it is this is the same person. Now you got to realize uh, a lot of people use the same names for kids. So you can end up with parallel families with very similar named children, but completely unrelated to each other. Happens all the time. People use the same names over and over and over again for their kids. So the more kids you can match with the proper ages, with the same names, the higher the chances are that you're dealing with the person you're looking for. Look for locations of birth. That's often given on census data. Does the location of birth match? And that can occasionally be wrong on the census data, but it's another match that can make it more likely that this person is the person you're looking for. Look for their occupations, the same occupation. That makes it more likely that this is the person you're looking for. Well, a great way to make sure that you're dealing with the same person is, are they living in the same house? Is it on the same street? Is it the same house number? Is it in the same general location of the city? Uh, that'll tell you. I mean, if it's the same house 10 years later and it's a similar sounding person, that last name is similar, you can bet it's the same person. Or if it's on the same street. Lots of times these people are tenants, and they might move from one house to another house across the street. That happens a lot with tenants, but they stay in the same location. Sometimes families live right next door to each other, or sometimes they even live in the same house. So when you look at a census data and you find who you're looking for, the name and the family, always look at the adjoining names of families in the adjoining houses. Or in the same house, because there's a chance that family members are also there. That's a great technique for finding other branches of your family you didn't know about, because lots of times a family may have a relative living with them who has a different last name. And that could give you an information about an entirely different branch of your family you knew nothing about. So always pay attention to the people who are living with the people that you're interested in. It may be in-laws, it may be grandparents, or uncles, or aunts, um, or brothers or sisters-in-law, or nieces or nephews. You can often really get clues. It's also a great way to match people up, because if you know the name of so and so's grandmother and you find this census data with this family who might be the people you're looking for, you're not sure, but they got grandma living with them. Now you know it's got to be them. So you can verify. Oh well, they got this grandma who's using a different last name. It's got to be the same people. So that makes it extremely likely you're dealing with the right target. Look for matches in religion. Is it the same religion? Um, any census data that you can use to match up somebody would increase the reliability of the match. So whatever the census data happens to be, see if you can match it up. Again, just because it's off doesn't necessarily mean you're not dealing with the right person. But if it is matched, it makes it more likely you got the right person. Other matches or indicia of reliability would be unusual names. An unusual name is a dead giveaway that you're dealing with the same person, generally speaking, or an unusual location. If you know that so and so came from New York and you know that they moved to Texas, and you find this person in Texas with the same birth date or the same age, there's a good chance it's the same person because of the unusual trip that they took. So what are the odds that this person would appear in Texas if it wasn't for the person you're looking for? Oftentimes, these families stay in the same exact cities, the same and in the same locations within cities, or the same wards or towns or townlands within cities. People don't move around a lot, especially the older and further back you go in time. People weren't mobile People did move around, obviously, but not to the extent they do today. They often stayed in the same exact place. They might switch houses, especially if they're tenants, but they're generally staying in the same place. So that's helpful as a genealogist. So you don't have to look all over the country. You can just stick to the same location and search for them in the same location 10 years later or 10 years earlier. There's a pretty good chance you're going to find them because they don't move around a lot. Another indicia of reliability is, hey, look, if this isn't the person, then where is that person? This person would be missing. So if this is like the only, you know, Dave Smith in this particular town, 10 years later, there's a Dave Smith record, but there aren't any other Dave Smith records in this town, and it's a pretty good chance this is the guy. But you always have to be careful of doppelgangers and people leaving parallel lives, the same names and the same family names and the same dates, and you'd be surprised that at these doppelgangers that appear in these parallel lives people have that match your own, but they're not related to you. That's the biggest challenge in genealogy is excluding those people from your family tree because it's very enticing to believe they're related to you because they seem to have all the right names and dates. But guess what? They're not related to you. Happens all the time. So in genealogy, this is real important. Applying rigor. The more rigor you apply, the better your tree is going to get. You don't want a wrong person down in your tree. It gives you the wrong information. You want the truth. You don't want a bunch of lies. And if you think somebody's the right person and they're not, then that stops you from looking for the right person or getting the right information. So don't put the wrong person down in your tree. Be very skeptical about any particular record and really demand a lot of verification that this is the correct person that you're looking for who appears in your tree, or you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Um, and remember, just because you have a name in your tree, John Smith, and just because you know his dates of birth and death and marriage, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just very basic information that you happen to know about this person. You know their names and some dates, and that's it. This person has an entire history that you may know nothing about. And so this information is just the tip of the iceberg. Um, Now, whether you can access that person's historical information or not, who knows? But just remember that these are actual people and they live actual lives, and there's a lot more detail about them than just a few dates that appear in a family tree. So these people can, if you want to bring them to life, you really have to find their background histories, their personal histories. And that's when they become very, very interesting as individuals when you start to learn facts about that person, if it's possible, if there's records or people who knew them that you can ask about. And then you can fill in a lot of those blanks about who this person was. But that will make that person come alive for you if you know much more about them than just their birth dates and death dates and marriages and where they're buried. Okay, so that's enough for now. Uh, so, if there's one thing I can impress upon you is be a professional genealogist. Use a lot of rigor, and a 9 out of 10 genealogists don't use proper rigor. And be careful of that because they're going to make mistakes in their family trees. Just don't assume that somebody is in fact your relative because the name matches. You've got to look for indicia of reliability and really get a feel through the matches that this is in fact the correct person that you're dealing with. Otherwise, your family tree is going to be wrong. All right. I hope you learned something. Take care.